we've been talking a lot about ownership in the Bay and specifically the Giants because of how bad they've been. Joe Lacob is an ever-present topic of conversation on these airwaves and in the Bay Area because the Warriors are the Warriors, and they're on the back end of one of the most successful dynasties that the sport of basketball has ever seen. And Joe Lacob, in his nature, is involved in the process, so he's always going to be part of the conversation. And lately, he's been under fire maybe a little bit more than he's ever been before in his tenure as the primary principal owner of the Warriors because they haven't been as good of late. So he's always top of mind when it comes to the Warriors. I think the Johnson family and ownership should become more of the conversation of the Giants as we move forward, especially if there's not a lot of change in the offseason, and who knows what the new CBA and the lockout is going to do about the entire situation as well, but that might have an impact. But then this week, Dibs, ownership of the 49ers, of course, Joe Lacob has entered the conversation, not for any kind of football reason, but because of what he did off the field, and he got arrested in Ohio. I'm sure most of you listening have heard by now. He essentially got by a sting operation by Ohio police. They put up an advertisement on a known prostitution website. He interacted with it multiple times, and before he got to wherever this ad was leading him to, he got pulled over and arrested by police in Ohio near his hometown of Youngstown. And as a result, Dibs, you have conversations around our three big sport teams here in the Bay, and of course, we got the Valks, we got the Sharks as well. But the Giants, the Warriors, and the Niners, suddenly ownership is becoming a topic across all three of these teams. And we were thinking we could compare and contrast ownerships, coaches, general managers.
Right.
Because clearly, at least in my mind, Debs, what the Giants are going through right now, they're in such a worse position than anybody else in the Bay Area. And it's because of maybe the lack of experience at the manager position, at the general manager Pobo position, but it's also because of who we think that the ownership group is. The Giants, I think, are far below everybody else.
And that, to me, is where the conversation should be. And I talk about this with Willard all the time about, quarterback rankings, whatever. For me, it's about quarterback rankings and head coach or play caller. That, to me, is more important than just, where do you have Brock Purdy ranked? Well, if Brock Purdy was a Carolina Panther, and no disrespect to Dave Canales, but he would probably be the 19th ranked quarterback, but he's here, and so I have him at like 12, 11, 10, wherever I have him, because he has Shanahan. And so for me, when you talk about ownership, you need to talk about ownership, decision maker, and coach, the troika or the trifecta of just that. And you look at the Giants, and right now the ownership is Charles Johnson, I guess, and he's 90-something, and he's never around, and his son, Greg Johnson, is the guy who's here, and it feels to me like he's more interested in...
Greg is like the person in charge. He's the chairman. Right. He's the chief decision maker.
So he's out there trying to make money. I don't think that he is really principally interested in being good. Buster Posey is really new in his job, and so is Tony Vitello. So I put them at the bottom of the three. And in the second spot, I would go to Lacob, Dunleavy, and Kerr. I think that Joe Lacob is still hard driving toward winning. Mike Dunleavy, the jury is not, for me, totally out, but the jury is not in. I think that he's done some good things, and I think that he's been in a spot where he hasn't had a great chance to do a lot of things. And Steve Kerr, I kind of feel like, is a little bit of a short timer. Like, he's got a 2-year deal, and that might be Steph, and that might be Draymond. And so what comes after that, I don't know. But for me, still at number one, despite the terrible decision to click on an ad twice on a Saturday night and once on a Sunday. And it seems to me that Jed York was either horny or lonely or both. I could stop, whatever.
Yeah.
Horny is just a word.
You caught me off guard is all.
Right. I mean, who among us with any sort of a libido has not been in that spot, right? And it's no judgment on whether or not that you are having those feelings. The judgment comes from what you do about it. And
yes.
It's funny, yes. Granny, because I knew I'd do the show with you today, and I was sitting on the H word earlier, and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to say the word horny and see how he reacts. And, well, I mean, he reacted with a chuckle, and that's great. But for me, his judgment in that moment has nothing to do with the fact that as an owner, he does the things that I want, which is, hey, we need to rework this contract. We need $40 million in cash. Boom, here it is. done. And I mean, it's more than 160. It's, 40 million in cash or 20,
a lot more.
Whatever the money is. Like, he does the things you want your owner to do. John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan, I think they work in concert very well. The team has done well under their regime. So for me, despite the East Palestine bust, the sting operation, I still have them at number one of the three.
It feels like as a result of this Jed York story, I've heard, and it's not just on this radio station, I've heard these callers, in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the midday as well, but I see it online, I see it on Twitter, I see it on Instagram, I see it in, some text threads I'm on with friends that are Niner fans. It's like, well, maybe this is the beginning of the end of Jed York's time as the principal owner of the 49ers. And I know both you and Willard have been on this show the last couple of days reacting to this and have said a number of times you don't think this is going to result in Jed York deciding to sell the 49ers. That remains TBD. We'll find out as the months and years move along. But I've heard so many Niner fans come out of the woodwork and say, I never liked Jed York, never thought he was a good owner, and hopefully this is the beginning of the end of his leadership of this organization. And I guess there's maybe a parallel between, I know they have different positions, but the way the Niner fan base feels about Jed York, it's kind of the way that Warrior fans feel about Mike Dunleavy, because early in Jed York's tenure, when he took over as the controlling person, the principal owner, and of course through his parents and his uncle and the relationship to the DeBartolo family, of course, all of that. There's when he first took over Dibs, he kind of felt like he was one of the group that brought the Niners to the dominance in the 80s and the 90s. And that, of course, had nothing to do with him. And it felt like he was trying to take advantage or take credit for a lot of that. And he maybe thought his head was a little too big. And the Harbaugh stuff happened, and he was one of the main reasons why that relationship ended so poorly, and he did not hire a good replacement in Jim Tomsula, and then Chip Kelly happened, and then he struck gold with Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch and learned in that process and all those failures, it's best to just kind of stick into the background. And I think for the most part, over the last decade since Shanahan took over, he's done a really good job of kind of just staying in the background. But the second that he steps out of line, one toe out of line, and you see so much of the fan base say, well, we never liked him. We never forgave him for what happened with Harbaugh. He wasn't the reason this franchise was great in the first place. Maybe this is the beginning of the end. And it's kind of like how Warrior fans feel about Dunleavy from his playing days. Then he left the organization. You forget about him. Now he comes back, and Warrior fans are expressing their distrust of him once again. But I don't know. It feels like the York conversation is shifting to where it was maybe earlier towards the end of the Harbaugh tenure.
It might be going that way, and even if you go further back than that, when John York took over, and basically he did so because his wife, Denise DeBartolo York, was Eddie D's sister, and so when Eddie D got forced out, it fell to Denise, and so Denise went to her husband, John, and John ran the team, and John did not run the team in a way that Niner fans actually liked, and they were not successful, and John York was kind of seen as somebody who was aloof and not really that accomplished or that capable of doing what he did, and eventually he brought in his son, Jed, and Jed was very young, and it was kind of a silver spoon vibe where, you only got the job because you were born on third base, and that's a fair way to characterize it, and then the whole thing with Harbaugh happened, and, he eventually would be the guy to fire Harbaugh. And I think that Jim Harbaugh kind of fired himself with the way he went about conducting his business. And, that's what Jim Harbaugh had done up until Michigan, where it was like 4 or 5 years. And then I'm going to go ahead and blow up my spot and move on. And, Jed was kind of left holding the bag. And
it wasn't all on Jed. You're right.
It was not all on Jed at all. And it was on Jim as well. But
Jed did not handle that situation well either.
No, and the pivot was to bring in Tomsula. Yeah. And then the pivot from that was Chip Kelly. And then the pivot from that was, all right, we'll bring in Kyle Shanahan. And at that point, when, Kyle was like, I'm bringing in John Lynch. And I think that Jed York realized, I'm not a football guy. So he stepped back, and it's been good. And it's been almost 10 years of that. And I do think outside of this embarrassing incident, Jed has done a good job of, answering the phone of like, hey, John, hey, you want to rework that deal? You need $22 million in cash? Hold on. Yeah, here it is. Boom. Call me later. And so I do think that Jed has done mostly a good job of owning the way you want him to own, which is we need money. Here's some money. And other than that, it's been Al Guido up front. And Al Guido actually is at the owners' meetings right now, and Jed York is not. And so the one thing that I want to assure fans of is the fact that the Yorks are not going to sell, because Jed had $160 in East Palestine and he got caught in a sting. That's not going to cause the York family to give up 90% of the Niners and sell them for $12 billion. The Yorks have been pretty clear about the fact that they want to keep it for the next generation and maybe the generation after that. Now, could there be somebody else who steps in place of Jed and actually is the front-facing owner? That might be a thing, but the Yorks are not selling the team. That's not happening.
You think he's, how good of an owner? Because it's different in the NFL than, say, like the NBA or even Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball, you can spend however much money you want to spend.
Right.
It's different. The NFL is obviously, it's a soft cap, right? It's not really a salary cap, but there are, ways that you can move around it. I feel like you can really flex your ownership prowess or your willingness to spend in a league other than Major League or other than the National Football League.
Right. I think the NFL is the one that gives you the most flexibility, though, in terms of how you can navigate the cap. And, Willard and I, we've been together almost 5 years on the radio, and his big thing has been cap schmap. And I've always told him, but the cap. And he actually is right. And I'll say that now because he's out of town and he's not listening.
Yeah, we'll cut this and send it along to him.
I know you will, because you're down on the dibber, but the one thing that ownership has done where you have a cap situation, and let's just say that Christian McCaffrey right now was looking at his situation and saying, you know what, I need more guaranteed money or I'm not showing up. Well, they would look at it and say, you know what if we gave you $25 million in a bonus and we stretched you out for 3 more years? Then Jed York would say, yeah, $25 million, boom, I'll do that. And that's where in the NFL, not every team has the willingness to go ahead and dip into the cash reserves and do what needs to be done to avoid the cap. And that's where
you can accelerate the money owed on a contract, decrease the cap hit for future years, and essentially you're paying all that out ASAP. You give your player just a one-time check for X amount of $1 million, and you save money in the future from your cap.
Right. You save money in the cap in the short term, but what you do is you build in what they call voidable years, and there's the dead cap money on the back end. And if you look at the Trent Williams deal, and I think the Kittle deal.
So many of them.
And maybe Fred Warner. Your best players, when they get up to a spot where they have no more guaranteed money, but they still want to play and you want them to play, you go ahead and rework the deal and give them a bonus that gets stretched out over the years, and then you tack on the dead cap years, and then, when they're gone and retired, well, the team is going to have to eat that money down the road.
But the only way that happens, and the only way the player accepts it, and the only way you get it done and it can benefit you in the short term is if you have an owner that is willing to part with a big chunk of liquid money in that moment to give to the player, and so everyone's happy in that moment.
I mean, Kevin Dana would probably be on the call when these deals are done. Cash me out one time.
Absolutely. Cash me out 10 million times.
Right. Cash me out 28.5 million times, but you need an owner willing to do that up front and say, yeah, here's the cash, and we'll go ahead and worry about the back end of it, with the dead cap years on our own. And that's where I think Jed York and the Yorks in general have done such a good job of getting their cap to be malleable.
888-957-9570 if you want to weigh in, talking Jed York and ownership in the Bay Area. A lot of conversation, of course, about Jed York. Joe Lacob is always a topic of conversation, and I think the Giants ownership group, the Johnson family, should come under the microscope a bit given what this season has been. Don in Berkeley wants to weigh in. What's up, Don?
Hi, a couple of things that I didn't hear mentioned that I think at least should get some consideration. One is about Mike Shanahan. I give him a lot of credit for owning up to the fact that he was at fault for that auto accident last month. But I also think that somewhere it should be talked about that he was really careless, and if he killed somebody, that would have been really bad luck, but it also changed the narrative that everyone's talking about. And, Jed York exercised very bad judgment, but he didn't kill anybody, and he had some luck involved, too, because he clicked the wrong link, probably. But the other thing is...
You mentioned Mike Shanahan. You're talking about Kyle Shanahan, right? And in his car accident? Is that what you're referring to?
Please give me a break. I'm 75 and I forget things.
No, I appreciate it, but I just don't. I want to make sure that if we're going to, slander somebody, then we, use the accurate name. I'm not saying you're slandering Kyle Shanahan, but yes, he's very fortunate that he didn't kill somebody, and I believe the other person involved in the crash was not severely hurt.
Yeah, he got lucky. I think they're very minor injuries for the woman in the other vehicle.
Certainly. Yeah. And, Jed York showed bad judgment. I don't think that was a life or death situation.
I also don't think he accidentally clicked on the wrong link or advertisement, considering that that's what our caller said, that maybe there was some bad luck involved or something.
The reports were he did it 2 times on Saturday.
He interacted with it 3 times.
Right, yeah. But the way I read it, it was 2 times on Saturday, and then, maybe you think twice about it and you go to sleep, and then you wake up on Sunday and you think, you know what? I do want to go ahead and click on that a 3rd time.
Yeah. But leadership groups of our teams here in the Bay Area, the Niners, led by Jed York as the principal owner, John Lynch as general manager, and Kyle Shanahan as head coach. The Warriors, led by Joe Lacob as the principal owner of the Golden State Warriors, Mike Dunleavy as general manager, Steve Kerr as head coach, and the Giants, main owner, main decision maker, leader of the ownership group, Greg Johnson, then Buster Posey, president of baseball operations, and Tony Vitello, the Giants manager. How do you rank? How do you compare and contrast these leadership groups from these 3 teams? Dibs thinks the Niners have the number 1 spot. Jed York, John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan. What do you guys think?